Okay, brilliant. So we are joined for another interview with Tom Barlow today. So hi, Tom. How are you doing today? You good?
I am very well, Dan. How are you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Yeah. How are you finding everything at the moment? Because obviously we're living kind of strange times.
It is very, very interesting. I think right now I'm probably working harder than I was when I was teaching full time.
Definitely.
I don't know if you know, but I've got a 7-month-old baby as well. Well,
Oh,
she's
wow.
nearly 8 months old. So we're having to cram all of our work into, like 3 nap hour windows, which is like 9 till 10 and then 12 till 1 and then 3 till 4. It's crazy, like trying to do everything that we're doing in that windows. It's mad.
Really mad. Yeah, I bet. Definitely. Yeah, we'll definitely speak about some of the online stuff that you've been doing, because I think it's important for people at the moment who have obviously had to move everything over to an online format. And it's treacherous times out there, I think, at the moment for
it's really hard.
and martial artists.
It's very, very difficult. I'm quite fortunate that I've been kind of working with the online stuff really since 2016.
Yeah.
I was doing it a long time before that with like for my gym and stuff, but personally, that's when I kind of got set up. So I was in quite a good place when this all kicked off.
Yeah.
I was quite able to help a few instructors as well, which is really, really nice.
Fantastic.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting times.
Definitely, yeah, unprecedented, we could say. Let's start with how you began. So obviously you're most well known for doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, European No-Gi champion, world champion as well, I think, Polaris commentator. How did it all begin for you? Did you start with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? Did you try other things? Did you? Oh, okay.
So I'll take you on my martial arts journey, which is kind of long and quite convoluted. So I actually started judo when I was probably around about 10 or 11. I was quite an angry kid. I was always fighting with my brother and whatnot. So my parents took me to the judo class, and I was pretty good at it, actually. I did okay. I think I ended up getting up to like an orange or a green belt. I trained for about 2 years. And then for whatever reason, they could no longer take me, so I kind of fell out of martial arts. Yeah. When I was about 14, 15, I saw my first Bruce Lee movie.
Right.
And I was like, wow, this is cool. I want to be Bruce Lee. And so I tried like training and like I was doing kind of whatever I could. And then a few years later, I started Lao Gar and Thai boxing at the same time. And that was like 97 something.
That's an interesting mix.
Yeah, well, it was kind of I got the Tao Jeet Kune Do. And I was like, you just train everything, and then you kind of it all together, and it'll be fine. Yeah, it'll absolutely be fine. So, I read that, and then I just started looking, and there was in my area that were kind of the options, really. There was still some judo and stuff, but I'd done that before, and I thought, I'll work on the kind of striking side of things. Sure. So I did that for probably about a year and a half. Never graded or anything in them particularly. I wasn't really that interested in doing it, and I didn't really compete at kickboxing or Thai boxing at that point. And then when I went to university, down in Plymouth. And one of the reasons that I chose it for kind of 3 reasons. Number one, they accepted me. Number two,
most importantly,
that was very, very important at the time. Number two, there was a lot of surfing down there as well, because I was into surfing. And then number three, they had a JKD club down there. And that was run by Anton St. James. Yep. And that's also where I met Matt Chapman and James Evans and those guys. So I went down there, and basically in my first year of university, I didn't really train, and it was because my halls were like 2 miles away from the university.
Right.
So I really couldn't do a lot then. And in my second year, or towards the end of my first year, I actually started to get into training. I made a little bit more of a commitment to do it. And I ended up moving about 5 minutes down the road from where they were training. So I spent a lot of time doing that, and we were learning like, Screamer, basic JKD stuff, some of the Wing
Chun stuff, Bruce Lee stuff.
Pretty much everything, yeah. Anton was very, very open in terms of, what he would show us and what we'd be working on, the things that we'd go through. And we did like lots of different areas. And even around that time, like Matt and James were quite heavily into like the MMA side of things. It was kind of very, very early MMA days in the UK. So there were like a couple of shows. James had just fought on something, what was it called? I can't remember the name of it, but you're allowed to kick. So it was like, you could do all the like takedowns and wrestling and jiu-jitsu and all that kind of stuff, but you're only allowed to kick when you were standing. So it was like,
no punching.
No punching at all when you were standing. It was a very, very, very weird kind of rule set.
Yeah.
I think it was called like Iron Man or something like that. I don't remember.
Okay, cool.
But anyway, they were doing all of this kind of stuff. James ended up fighting Mark Weir, who was kind of a big name at the time.
Yeah.
And we did the club that I was part of decided to run a Valetudo competition down in Plymouth. It was called the Open Valetudo Trials or something like that. And it was like proper old school. So they wore bag mitts when they were standing up. And then when they hit the ground, they came off, and then you had open palm strikes. So it was kind of like this weird mix, and they had this pause on the ground. So there was all that kind of going on. So it was very, I guess, quite progressive in terms of like what was going on within the martial arts world. And so I trained there. I trained for a good couple of years, but I found that I was much better at like the ground side of things than I was at stand-up.
Do you think that was just your stature, your personality, what your interest was?
I think it was my personality as much as anything else. I'd always been like kind of, as I said, I went to judo first because I was a little bit of a, terror. And I was always like wrestling and ruffling and tumbling and stuff like that. And I just found that I found it easier for me, like to get into that and start, utilizing the techniques. And I found I was quite naturally quite good at it as well. Like I'm quite athletic. So it kind of fit into, I guess, my personality, but also, I could use athleticism as well.
Perfect.
So then I kind of, at that time as well, I ended up starting teaching at the club. So I was doing a lot of the teaching and the coaching and stuff. And I used to go on a lot of seminars with Eric Paulson.
Yes, awesome.
Like very, Eric's great, just an absolute wealth of knowledge. So I spent a lot of time like going to his seminars and bringing it back, and then working with the guys that I was teaching, or just training with some of my friends who were competing at the time as well. And then what happened first after that? I ended up doing my first MMA fight, I think in 2004, which was on Andy Barker's show, and I won in like 30 or 40 seconds or something by armbar. It was a really fun fight. Yeah, it was a very, very entertaining fight. When I was warming up, I was warming up with one of my friends, and I was practicing a leg kick, and I leg kicked him, and he had his phone in his pocket. So I kicked his phone and bruised my foot, and then I had to go out and fight, which was great. Yeah, so I ended up just taking the guy to the ground and then armbarring him, and it was all over very quickly. In fact, we had some guys coming up from Plymouth, and they missed the show because it was over so fast. They got the wrong time, and it was done and dusted.
Sorry guys, got to be quicker.
Yeah, exactly. So then I went out to the US, and I spent like a month out in the US training with Eric, and training at the Inner Santo Academy as well. It was right when the Inner Santo Academy moved.
Incredible.
From its like long time location, it moved up towards Marina del Rey. Is it Marina del Rey? Venice Beach kind of area, Marina del Rey. It moved up there, so I was there in that kind of a weird transition. And Eric was just setting up his own gym somewhere else as well. And that was the same time he was training Ken Shamrock. So I ended up doing a lot of sparring and training with Ken Shamrock, which is quite funny. And James Wilkes, who's now become super famous.
How was that?
Painful, very, very painful. Obviously, Ken was quite a big dude, comparative to me. In fact, James is quite a big dude. Everybody's a big dude.
They're scary guys,
So we used to go. My first introduction was me and another guy. I think it was a guy called Big Dave, who was one of Eric's students, and we were going to go sparring. And do you know who Vernon White was? You remember Vernon Tiger White?
I've heard the name, I think, but yeah,
he fought a lot in like Japan, and a lot of King of the Cage stuff as well. Like quite well known in that kind of circuit. And Ken and him were sparring in the ring, and then, like, the first thing that we saw was like Ken just like boxing away and cracked Vernon and knocked him down, and like literally to the canvas. And me and Big Dave were there, just like, jeez, what are we getting ourselves into?
Right, you're next.
Literally, like Ken looks at me and goes, "Are you all right?" And then Vernon's like half asleep, and he's like, "Well, get up then, let's go again." And he does it again, and he does it like 2 or 3 times more. And then Vernon's like crawling out of the ring, and then we're like, "Okay, we've got to go spar Ken now."
Right, let's go.
Yeah, so that was my kind of introduction to sparring, and Eric's advice was like, just run away, just don't let him
just run in circles.
Yeah. So that's not really my attitude. Like the first thing I did was like, okay, I'm gonna spar him, why not? And so I went out and I started like, doing my thing, cracked me with a right straight, and I just remember it felt like a fake freight train had hit me in the head. Okay, now I'm running. So,
change tactics.
So it was a very weird, funny experience, but it kind of taught me a lot as well. Like, there's a lot of, Eric used to have to drive maybe an hour and a half to 2 hours. So we were training down in San Diego, part of the Lions Den. And we used to train. So we used to, we'd get up really early in the morning and we'd drive from Orange County down to San Diego, like right into the center of San Diego, I think it was. And that's quite a way, particularly if the traffic's bad. And it was like a 2-hour journey. And so it kind of warped my sense of what you do for training a little bit.
Yeah.
So I got used to traveling quite long distances for training, which is what happened when I started training with Braulio.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I was over there, I started. I asked Eric who I should be training with, and he recommended Braulio Estima, who became my coach after that. But it wasn't for probably around about 2 years after that I really connected with Braulio, because he was up in Birmingham.
Yeah.
And I was super busy like teaching and training, and I was still fighting MMA and stuff like that. And I ended up losing to a guy called Paul Bridges by armbar, and I was like, right, I really need to learn how to do this jiu-jitsu stuff. So I started making like a consistent effort to go and train with him and spend more time. So I used to wake up in the mornings, and then I'd drive for 4 hours, train for an hour and a half, come back to Plymouth for 4 hours back, and then I have to teach from like 4:30 until 9. Yeah. And I did that consistently for 5 years or so.
Tough schedule.
Yeah, it was rough. It was really, really rough. But like having that experience with Eric, it kind of was like, well, he's the best guy in the UK. At that time, like 2006, there weren't that many, very high level jiu-jitsu people in the country.
Yeah.
We'd had like the first 3 UK black belts, which was Jude, Mark Walder, and Rick Young. That was kind of it. And there were a few like purple belts and stuff scattered around.
Yeah.
And so my choices were, I could drive up to Bristol, which is like a 2-hour drive, 2.5-hour drive, or I could do like 3.5 and go and train with Braulio. And I was like, well, I may as well just go to train with Braulio.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any difference at this point. It's like another hour or whatever.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I had to do, and we didn't have all this online stuff where you could, just watch videos and stuff. It was all DVDs, and they were really hard to get hold of. And you used to have to pay import tax when you import them from Budo Videos, and it was
old school.
It was a hassle, but it was what we had to do back in the day.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, perfect, cool. Let's talk about your competing days then. So obviously you said that you've competed in MMA before. You moved more onto the jiu-jitsu and the BJJ from training with Braulio. When did you then decide to compete? Was that just a follow-up from the MMA stuff, or did you just not like it
literally
anymore?
I was always, so my last fight in MMA was like 2006. And I always planned on going back to MMA. So I've done a couple of other things as well. So I've got like I'm like a 5th degree black belt in kickboxing, and you got 2 different black belts in Eskrima as well. One under Caco dos Paris, and the other one under Anton St. James. Yeah. So I was always like training and competing, and I was doing like kickboxing and Thai boxing fights with the mindset of going back into MMA at some point. Yeah. So it was very natural for me. Like, I got my blue belt, and I was already competing pretty much as soon as I could. There weren't very many competitions at the time. I think the first one I did was like, what did I do first? It was Seni. They used to have the Gracie Invitational at Seni. Yeah. So I just literally rocked up, had no idea on the rules, nothing. I just remember turning up, meeting up with Braulio. Braulio was like, "You gonna go fight?" I was like, "Okay." So I went and I was asking, like, I had some of Braulio's guys were there, and I was like, "What are the rules? How do I win this?" And they were like, "Well, you can do it." And it was like that very typical first competition experience, except I was jumping in blue belt at the time. Yeah. But yeah, so I ended up winning that, and then I did a couple of other competitions around, and I started competing. I found that the easiest way for me to get competition experience was to go internationally. Okay. So from a very, very early stage, I started competing, around kind of Europe a lot of the time, because there was Seni was a big competition, and then there was the Northern Open, Southern Open, maybe the Bristol Open was at that point, and the Hereford Open, but that was kind of it. There wasn't anything else. Yeah. So I started going doing like the ADCC trials. I represented England twice under FILA. Because at the time the Olympics had really cut down the wrestling weights, and FILA, who the governing body for the Olympic wrestling, was trying to bolster up their programs. They were looking into like grappling, pancration, sambo, beach wrestling, all kinds of other stuff to keep their organization relevant. And they introduced grappling was one of the things. So I did 2 trials, and I went out to Turkey, and then I went out to Switzerland, competed like anything that I could find that kind of interested me to compete, and ideally avoid fighting the same people over and over again. Yeah, sure. Because as I said, I'm kind of a small guy, and I was kind of at the forefront of jiu-jitsu. I very quickly progressed to being in the first wave of people doing jiu-jitsu, or like competing quite regularly. So I would always fight the same guys over and over again, which kind of became tedious. So I spent a lot of time traveling and competing, and very consistently competed up until I still very consistently compete now, even. And it became part of just what I do, and a very nice way for me to develop and train, because I didn't always have access to, a lot of training levels, high level training partners, or a coach. I could go out, compete, see what worked, see what didn't, and progress from there.
Fantastic, cool. Are there any standout kind of competitions or standout matches that really, will stand out and highlight in your career, I suppose?
I think
for good or bad reasons.
Yeah, there's one in 2007. I think in 2007, I got invited to the ADCC trials in Finland. I flew over to Finland to Turku. Crazy journey. Like you fly into, I think this is Helsinki, the capital. Then you have to get this little turbo, like twin prop plane into like the middle of nowhere to go to this city called Turku. And I went over there, flew over there. I was one of like, I think either 16 or 32 people to be invited. And I met this German guy, and he heel hooked me in about 30 seconds. And that was it. And I trained super hard, and I was like, man, this sucks.
Yeah.
It really it really stands out in my mind about like how, you can put all this effort in, and sometimes the guy's better than you.
It's just,
and I remember I was in Finland, and this was like back in the day before 3 did roaming and all that kind of stuff. I remember phoning up Braulio, and Braulio was like, bro, I lost my first 5 major competitions. Like first round, I was like, okay, it's everybody loses. It's fine. Yeah. So that one really kind of sticks out in my mind.
Okay.
It's being quite a learning lesson.
Yeah.
And then another one is in 2015, the last time I won Worlds. So I won Nogi Worlds 2013, 14, 15.
Sure.
In 2015, I had a really crazy year. I broke up with a long-term in 2014. At the end of 2014, I broke up with a long-term girlfriend. My gym, I had one of my instructors leave, and it took like the majority of my students, or the vast portion of my students, with them.
Wow.
And so it was like this crazy up and down year, like all over the place. I was selling houses, I was severing bank accounts, and I was still trying to compete and do things in that time. And it was all over the place. And so I went into the final, and I think it was in November or December, and I had a really, really tough run. I didn't feel great. I hadn't trained as well as I could have done, because of all this stuff going on. Sure. I managed to get through to the final. I fought a guy called Fabio Passos in the final, who's very, very good. And it was a very, very close fight, and I ended up winning the fight. I took his back, like probably a minute left in the fight. I took his back, couldn't finish it, and he managed to escape. But it was like after that fight, there was this unbelievable kind of sense of, I don't know how to describe it, whether it's relief or just like everything that kind of happened. Like it was crazy. And I ended up going under I'd won, and if you looked at me under the bleachers, it looked like I just lost. Like I was just an emotional wreck under those things. So, that was one of the biggest, in terms of the things that I remember, that's one of the biggest moments that I remember. And it was away from everybody. It wasn't in front of the spotlight or anything like that.
Sure.
It was
personal and professional.
It was just a crazy, crazy experience to have that kind of release. I have no idea there's a fly on my camera. There we go. Really, really odd experience,
Yeah, definitely. Oh, brilliant. Let's talk about receiving your black belt then, because the BJJ black belt is a very well-respected thing, especially comparatively maybe to other arts, which we'll maybe get into a little bit later on and see how controversial we can get without pissing too many people off.
No, it's fine. I'll be very controversial. It's all
excellent. Well, but yeah, the BJJ one's still very high up and still very well respected.
It is, yeah. And I think a lot of, I'll talk about it a bit more in a minute. I'll talk about my experience of getting it and whatnot. So mine is kind of I got my black belt pretty quickly. I got my, so I started training with Braulio. I think the first time I ever trained with him was the end of 2005, start of 2006. Within 2 sessions, I got my blue belt.
Okay.
I got my purple belt 10 months after that. I got my brown belt 2 years after that. And then I got my black belt, I think, 2 years after that. So it took me around about 5.5 years to get my black belt in total. So really, really fast.
Yeah.
And I was competing. The thing is, I was competing all of that time. I was, teaching all of that time. I was training all of that time. And I was winning competitions as well. So it was always it was kind of right for me to go through those things.
Sure.
Actually, when I got my black belt, I was in a really, really bad way. I'd injured my back. I was out of training for probably 3 or 4 months at that point.
Wow.
No, it wasn't. It was probably it's probably within the first month. I was out in total for probably about 4 or 5 months. But when I got my black belt, it was the end of 2011. I've been out for about a month. And I think it was like the strain of, I just done ADCCs, fought in Nogi Worlds. I've been flying around doing all kinds of different stuff. And it was just a strain of continual sitting, driving, traveling. You know, like when I was doing the ADCC, it was like once a week I was driving up to Birmingham to train. So I did make that journey. It wrecked my body.
Yeah.
And I did that for like 3 months, I think. So yeah, I got my black belt, and like I you know, I had to do this speech, and I couldn't roll with anybody, and it was a really weird experience getting it. And then like I started competing as a black belt, and I realized that it doesn't really change anything. And the thing about when you get a black belt, that it's kind of like the start of a journey, and that really was like that for me. Like I've now been a black belt longer than, so I've been a black belt nearly 9 years. The end of this year. I've been longer than I was any of the dark color belts combined, and I've learned so much more than like huge amounts more than whenever I was a color belt. You know, about jiu-jitsu, about how to train, compete, like tons and tons of stuff. So it really is that first stepping stone towards it. And you know, it was a crazy. I think I was like Braulio's 5th black belt that he awarded, or something along those lines.
Wow.
You know, so it was crazy. You know, it was really crazy. Yeah, it was good. But I never got a picture. I've got this one blurry picture at the end of it of me, Braulio, and a guy called, one of Braulio's back was called Lee Catlin at the end, and it's like it's the worst picture. Because he used to always do like belts at the end of the year, and he'd have like a big gathering, because he obviously had a lot of people all around the country, so he'd get everybody together and do all the promotions. So I couldn't make that because I had my own thing on, my own kind of gathering and whatnot. But he had, at the time, Zay, who was his instructor, was over like a week before to do a seminar. So I came up to that seminar, and that's where he awarded me. So it was kind of a little bit, I kind of knew it was probably going to happen, but it was a little bit out of unexpected. So no one was really recording it. No one was taking photos or any of these kind of things. So yeah, it was a weird experience.
Cool. You don't have to answer this question if you don't want to, but do you hold your BJJ black belt in more regard than you do your other black belts? You said you got your 5th dan, kickboxing, you've got your Screamer ones. Are all your black belts amazing, or do you have like a hierarchy of the belts that you've got?
No, I mean, the amount of energy and time that I put into getting my black belt is more than any of the other belts.
Okay. Yeah.
And that's not to say that getting a black belt in the other arts isn't as valuable or anything like that. It just, if I'm punching you in the face, like I punch you in the face and it connects or it doesn't connect. You know, there's not a lot of skill or technique in terms of actually throwing a punch, because there's no contact, there's no connection with you. And at the moment I touch your face, it's no longer connected, right? With jiu-jitsu, you have to deal with how to understand how to manipulate people's bodies, like how to secure positions, the kind of like the finer details, and it just takes longer to do that.
Sure.
You know, if you break kickboxing down into like its fundamental core like techniques, you've got like a jab, a cross, which could be considered the same thing, a couple of hooks, couple of uppercuts, overhand, a couple of body shots. You know, all these can take refinement. But actually learning the basic technique isn't that long. If you add in the kicks, you've got front kicks, round kicks, side kicks, hook kicks, and then spinning variations and jumping variations. The skill for kickboxing is like learning the timing, learning the distance and range. But none of that relies on the other person particularly in the same way. So you can progress relatively quickly at kickboxing. With jiu-jitsu, you can't do that. You have to understand how the other person moves, how to control them. It's a very different art. So it will always take longer, or should always take longer, to get a black belt in jiu-jitsu. So the amount of energy and time it took me to get my black belt is just longer. And because of that investment in time, I would say that's why the black belt is put on the level with it. You know, rather than it being more valuable or anything like that, I just invested so much more time. And now, like, you know, I mean, I used to train a ton kickboxing. I was teaching kickboxing every evening. You know, I trained multiple times a week. But there's just not as much into it. There literally isn't. Even if you start including all the other striking, you know, talk about ghosts, but they're moving off the, there's still not a huge amount to it, because there's no connection. You don't need to move the other person in the same way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. No, that's a really good answer. Yeah, I like it.
Hopefully that also the riddle of whether the jiu-jitsu black belt is more valuable or not. Because you know, if you took, they always, I think the thing when I was starting was like a BJJ blue belt is like a black belt in every other art. Yeah,
that's what I've heard as well. Yeah,
absolutely it is, because you've spent pretty much the same amount of time. Most people get kickboxing probably around about 3 years. You can get to a pretty decent standard in about 3 years if you're investing the same amount of time as jiu-jitsu, and you'd probably be, you know, a black belt in that. In jiu-jitsu, it's going to take you 3 years to get to the point to a blue belt, or 2-3 years. You know, so yes, it is the same, but that's not to say that it's better or worse in that way. It just takes longer. There's more to learn. There's more to do in jiu-jitsu than there is in like other arts.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. You said then, so you started the BJJ quite early on when it was first hitting kind of the UK market. Now it's arguably probably one of the biggest martial arts in the UK and the world. Just in terms of the rise of popularity of it and things like that. You've got massive academies coming up like Gracie, Barra, things like that. You've got online academies such as yourself. What do you think to this? Is this a good thing for the martial arts? Is this a bad thing? Is it dependent on who's instructing it? Have you seen a standard drop maybe in kind of the 10 years or more than that you've been active in?
No, I think generally the standards are a lot better. Like when I was a purple belt, if I was to fight purple belts nowadays, I'd get wrecked. You know, and like legitimately, there's purple belts out there that will wreck me now.
Yeah.
Because, like, I think it's with any art, like jiu-jitsu was so restricted at the start. You know, really it came into people's minds. I would say 93 is probably the earliest that people really started thinking about Brazilian jiu-jitsu with like the UFC, right? Yeah. That's 25, 30 years ago. I can't do the math off the head, something like that, right? 27. 27? Yeah. I'm going to go with 27. Anyway,
you go with that, yeah.
If you look at karate, right? Karate's been in the UK for decades and decades more than that.
Yeah.
You know, kickboxing is the same thing. Okay, kickboxing is a relatively modern art. You'll be still talking like sport karate, which is around late 60s, early 70s. That's just a longer period of time.
Yeah.
And you had more people doing it back then. It was easier for the information to get disseminated out.
Yeah.
You know, if you look at let's say take Braulio, for example, right? You know, I was one of the first few crop of black belts. Now, every year, it took Braulio a long time to get to those black belts. You know, his first one, I think, was like maybe a year before me, something like that. Now, every year, he's giving out more black belts to people.
Yeah.
And now they're going out and they're starting their own clubs, they're disseminating the information.
Yeah.
It's just much easier for that to happen. And so the quality of the information is out there. It's more readily available. It's a lot easier. People don't have to travel for 4 hours to go to a train, right? Because very few people would do that.
Yeah.
And so the standard's gone up. The other thing about jiu-jitsu is for most people, it's a combative art. You know, very few people do jiu-jitsu and don't roll, even in the academy.
Yeah.
So you learn, like you have to kind of be keeping kind of up with people of a similar sort of standard to yourself. You'll find like these young 20-year-olds of super athletic competitors trying to wreck everybody. You know, that like kind of middle-aged group who are just going there, but they still all try to wreck each other. And they're trying to keep up with each other. And you got the old guys who are all doing the same kind of thing. You know, so you get these individual cliques. So it forces it to kind of keep developing, keep alive, keep, you know, the standard relatively high. You know, if I go to a gym, you can kind of tell, or if like one of my students goes to a gym, they're going to be able to tell if they're legitimate blue belts or not.
Sure. And
there's still, at the moment in jiu-jitsu, there's still that thing where they're like kind of weeding out fake black belts or fake purple belts or brown belts. It still happens very, very regularly. Yeah. And it's even more so now because it gets, you know, popularized on social media and whatnot.
Yeah. Do you think that's a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It keeps the art relatively pure. It really does. And it's hard to say. Like, I know people that have been given black belts because of just the time they deserved a belt. You know, and I have kind of a little bit mixed feelings on that. It depends on the person as much as anything else. I fully believe that everybody should be able to get a black belt, but you still have to be able to possess those skills and be able to apply them against someone who's had a similar experience and in a similar place of life as yourself. You know, I think that's kind of the measuring stick. So yeah, I think it is a good thing in that sense. It keeps the art relatively pure, or relatively, you know, steering away from the kind of the dojo element of it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and that's probably one of the main criticisms of martial arts nowadays, to be honest with you, that the standards are dropping maybe just because organizations are getting bigger, martial arts are getting more popular, and so maybe the information filters down more and things are lost in translation, or things are kind of passed down in a way that's different perhaps, or not as pure as what it was originally thought of.
I think so. One of my experiences in jiu-jitsu is, for me, the way that I apply a technique is going to be slightly different to you, to my wife. My wife's a black belt as well, to Braulio, to everybody, because we're different sizes.
Yeah.
And because I teach it or show it differently to someone that's like 7 foot, it doesn't make it wrong. It doesn't make it different. That's the way they apply it.
Yeah.
You know, and it's about creating an environment for the students that they can then learn their own way of applying that as well, and making sure that, okay, if they're going to do an armbar, that it's, you know, the key points are correct, the way they apply it is correct, the mechanics of the position are correct.
Yeah.
The problem is when you lose that. Like I saw the classic video of this guy, I think he's in India or something like that. He's doing an armbar, but his like the arm isn't between the legs, like it's off to the side, and the guy's tapping, and it's like, that's just literally not real. Like,
not even a little bit of right there.
Yeah, it's not even a little bit of right. Sorry, I've got a fly that just keeps in front of the camera.
Trying to get
it's not even a little bit of right. You know, you can have your legs both over one side of the body. You can have one leg close to the body and the other leg over the head, leg off the head, and then both legs. Doesn't matter, but you still have to have the fulcrum, which is your hips. Without that, that's just wrong. And I think it can be very difficult if you start to just look at the technique and say, this is my only way of doing a technique. But you still have to provide the environment where people can learn their own way of doing a technique. You know
perfect. I mean? Yeah, good. Yeah, perfect.
I think what to go to a kind of slightly different point with the climate of currently everybody being online, is incredibly difficult to teach jiu-jitsu online effectively.
Yes.
And I think for all martial arts, that's the same. The biggest problem that I see within martial arts is lack of sparring above all else, because that is your truest test of whether you know a technique or whatever.
Yeah.
And it can be very isolated sparring. It can be, you know, full on, you're doing everything. It can be light contact, but you have to be doing something to make sure that the technique that you're using is real and works against
active and live.
Yeah, because if you don't have that element, if you don't have that element, you're just waving your arms in the air. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with a lot of martial arts. And they don't include that for, you know, I hear people talk about insurance. I hear people talk about all kinds of different things, like, you know, people won't train, they won't do this, they won't do that, you know, and really the sparring should be the most fun element. And it's about educating your students that it is a lot of fun to be able to do that, to work on a fully resistant person, to train your students to be able to do it safely in an environment that is safe. And those are kind of the key things, and that's where a lot of martial arts get let down.
And to get their progression up as well. You're going to progress so much quicker as well, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, when you spar, you learn what works and what doesn't.
Yeah.
You know, I often see with jiu-jitsu, there's so many videos put up of people doing things that look so cool. But just because you can do it doesn't mean that you can actually do it in reality.
Sure.
You know, it has to be pressure tested. It has to be put, you know, against a live opponent to see if it's going to work and see if it's going to be, you know, beneficial or whatever. You know, and I think that's where it goes wrong. You know?
Yeah, excellent. You said then that it's difficult to teach jiu-jitsu online, but you are doing it, and you were probably one of the first ones. You've been doing it for a long time, and people are just now maybe starting to wake up a little bit and think, oh, okay, online, with the help of people like yourselves that are successful at doing it, like people like Matt Chapman as well, who you mentioned earlier. We had an interview with him a couple of days ago about moving business online and things. And I think people are waking up to it now, but there's still a lot of reluctance.
I think
school mentality.
So I think there's two parts to it. So if we're talking about, let's talk pre-corona and post-corona, right? Because there's a big difference between the two.
Yeah.
Pre-corona, I could rely on showing, or I could assume that I was going to show a technique on video, then someone could go and practice it against a partner. Post-corona, I can't necessarily do that. So the way that I've had to start teaching people is almost making the assumption that they don't have a training partner to work with. And that changes what I'm capable or able to do in an online format.
Yeah.
Previously, I could put like, my brain, the way that I structure technique is always through like systems, right? So we've got like, this group's doing this, and then they defend like this, so I do this, and that's how I always put things across to people. I find it the easiest way for people to learn.
Logical,
which is great if you have a training partner, you can practice it, and you can spar it, and you can do all those kind of things. Yeah. To a certain extent, you can still do that now if you even have like a training dummy, but eventually we're going to get to the point that you can't you can't go any further. Like jiu-jitsu is going to lose its realism if you're not able to spar with a training partner and apply it in that pressure tested way, which kind of goes back to what we were saying before.
Yeah, sure.
So in terms of post-corona, what I've started doing with my teaching is talking more about like solo drilling and the benefits of that you get from solo drilling. So it will never replace a a training partner. But that doesn't mean that it can't support your training if you have a training partner, or at least help you in times that you can't get to a training partner.
Yeah.
So in jiu-jitsu, solo drilling, it's much like shadow boxing or anything like that. It can be really good for your mobility. So you can develop like, you know, the ability to move your body, put it in funny places, bend in weird ways. It can be very good for your conditioning. Like if you do 100 sprawls, you're going to be, you know, sweating profusely and in a puddle of mess, you know, you're crying for air or whatever. And you can also, to a certain extent, develop both technical and transitional skill in the movements. So, for example, from a very, like, I've been, so because of my whole history with like traveling to Braulio and not having many training partners, I've been solo drilling kind of since 2007, probably even earlier than that, in all honesty.
Yeah.
One of the drills I used to do a ton, because it related directly to competition, is I'd shoot. So I'd do a double leg shot. Yeah. I'd shoot the person sprawled, then I'd sit out. Okay. Yeah. And I used to drill that religiously over and over again, because I'd always find that would be the situation. My double leg wasn't very good. Or it was, not that it wasn't very good, but it was like people could sprawl it and defend it. So I'd end up in the sprawl position. I'd have to clear my hips and get around to their back. So I drilled that over and over and over again, so it became instinctual. Yeah. And now if someone sprawls on me, I sit out very quickly and I'm gone, and it works. And I did most of that without having a live training partner.
Sure.
I was able to drill it to the point that it was comfortable, and then I could put it back into sparring and do the same thing again. So I could shoot on someone, I'd even let them sprawl on me, so I could then work sit outs to go towards the back and tell it. So you can work that transitional speed. And there are a lot of solo drills that you can do to develop that kind of transitional speed as well. However, eventually you're always going to need to come back and start to put it into a real situation. You know, and if we don't have training partners, that's going to be a very big problem for people progressing forwards with live arts like jiu-jitsu, like judo, anything that relies on sparring. You know, boxing to a certain extent, okay, but you still need to get that feedback, that physical feedback from people.
Definitely good. Okay, perfect. What are your thoughts then on how Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, or how martial arts maybe is just gonna, do you think it's gonna change? PC, so post-corona?
I honestly, I hope that we get out of lockdown as quickly as possible, because you know, from a personal point, my business is crumbling around my eyes, you know, and it legitimately is, you know. Some people are doing great, we're doing okay, but you know, eventually it's going to get to the point that we can't afford to live. That's the reality of the situation, you know. So we're going to need to come out of this at some point. Hopefully it's very, very soon, and we can get back to training in some capacity.
Yes.
Because one of the things that I found, more than just the physical side of training with us, it's such a community-based thing as well. Like I know people that their sole like group of friends or whatever is based around their gym.
Yeah.
And now they're like in isolation. They don't really know anybody else, and they're just stuck doing kind of nothing.
So difficult, yeah.
Crazy. And so hopefully we can at least start getting to the gym in some kind of capacity. Yeah. Maybe we have to create social distancing for a while, where we're using more kind of solo drilling ideas, or limited training partners, or something along those lines. But we can at least get that community side back and get people interacting, because I know that's where people are going nuts.
I think you've hit the nail on the head then. I think it's one of the most important aspects, especially at the moment.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's very difficult. You can do it to a certain extent online, but it's very, very difficult.
It's not the same feel though, is it? It's good for people at the moment, because especially if they're stuck inside, they want that. Just even if it's something like this, where at least you're communicating with people, aren't you? If you live on your own, it's like, but at least you're seeing people, you're getting a bit fitter, maybe you're doing a workout, you're doing your workouts, aren't you? Your workout of the day, is it?
Yeah, we're doing them every morning.
Things like that, yeah. So things like that, I think it's really good just for people's mental health, physical health, everything.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of my gut feeling, is that's the way that's what's going to happen first. For us, anyway, we're going to have this kind of staggered restart. Yeah. And then I hope that eventually we can get back to full-on training. I suspect, again, it will still remain relatively small group classes for us, with ideally the same people kind of working together. So you've got like maybe family, or like 3 or 4 families that only train together, and we put on classes for those people, or adults or whatever, but that's their only interaction in the gym, and then they go away. But that's still, the problem with that is it's still coming through myself and my wife.
Exactly, yeah.
Teaching for us. Yeah. So if one of us gets it, we pass it on. But you know, hopefully we're in a position that it's not so important now, you know. Yeah. And you know, I think a lot of people going online for martial arts academies is a fantastic thing. You know, it really is. If you can put your curriculum online, it helps your students. You know, if you can even stream your classes for people that can't necessarily get there in a way. That's a great thing to be able to do for people. The biggest problem I think coming out of this is that all of this work that martial arts instructors are doing, they're going to stop doing. They're going to go, well, I don't need that anymore, and
forget about it.
That's it. I've spent all this time building this online platform. Maybe a month afterwards they continue it going, but it very quickly kind of falls by the wayside. I remember talking to I spoke with Matt recently about this, and we both said, like, it's fantastic that people are doing these things, but for me and for him, we've seen so many people start these projects, and within 2 months, 3 months, they've gone, and they're no longer there. And you need that consistency in producing content, putting up instructions, whatever you're doing, filming your classes. That needs to be done day in, day out if you want this to grow and kind of work from there. From my personal perspective, we've been very fortunate that we've had the online stuff, which has supported us while we can't necessarily earn an income from our academy or the income that we like. A big portion of myself and my wife's income comes from seminars that was shut down. I've got no more booked for the rest of the year because I can't. We can't go out and do it. So having that backup, that online backup, is super, super important, and it's allowed us to kind of at least sustain some income coming through. So hopefully instructors kind of keep that mentality on, and they look at a way of incorporating online training methods within their gym. It will help your students. The amount of times that I've been able to go to a student, and so at my gym we give people, like, we're going to be giving people access to our online site for free because they're members, they're already paying us. It's the information, they can have it, and they've supported us as well through this experience. But even before that, I could pull out one of the videos if I taught someone, I saw someone, and then just send it off to them, and like, this is what I was talking about. Now go train it, go practice it. You go work on it and develop that area. So that becomes very, very powerful for your students. So that's kind of what I'm hoping with the online stuff as well, and people start to embrace it a little bit more. But really, I think for all martial arts, we need to get back into the gyms in some way and as quickly as possible.
We do, and hopefully it won't be too long. But okay, thank you very, very much, Tom. You made that really easy for me. That was great.
Sorry, I can talk forever. Like it.
No, I love it. That was great. Is there anything else that you want to kind of add, or you want to discuss?
No, I think, like, honestly, people just, it's kind of a weird time out there online, in Facebook land, and everywhere. There's so much information going out. Like, please do some research before you share a post. There's so many crazy people out there, and like, a YouTube video isn't a peer-reviewed article.
Not the gospel.
It's not the gospel, and please don't go by it. Try to, number one, do your own research, look into it, and number two, like, look to the opinion of experts. People are out there actually, like, in the field doing what they're doing. Obviously the government and all those kind of things, and then make your best judgment. Like, for myself and my wife, we shut our academy very, very early on. Like, we shut probably about a week, maybe even longer, maybe even a couple of weeks before the government recommended it. Because for us, despite and it has had a massive impact on us financially, it is the right thing to do. I could not, go be in a position where we've been the cause of someone getting infected and potentially dying. That it can't happen. So you can't put those business side of things against it. I want to get back to training. I want to get back to teaching. I love it as quickly as possible. But think about those things and just try to be as sensible as you can, and then put proper precautions back into what you're doing as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
One more thing. Sorry.
Yeah, go. Yeah.
Support each other. Like, look out for each other. Do what you can to help each other out. We're like, everybody in the world is in this together, and just look out for each other. Like, be a good community for martial arts in the whole, but just in general. If you can do something, try and help them out. So it's a simple, like, for myself, if anybody's selling things online or doing, like, even posting up there, hit like, add a comment, do whatever you want, post a meme. That helps. You'd be amazed at how much that can help, because it shows, the algorithm stuff that what you're doing is popular for people, and it will help, any small business out there. So support each other. Don't have that scarcity mindset. That's really important.
I love it. Yeah, perfect. Okay, thank you very, very much, Tom. A pleasure as always. Hopefully we'll all be back training very, very soon. I can come see you maybe, get some training in. That'll be good.
Absolutely.
And okay. Take care of yourself, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. Talk soon. Bye-bye.
Cool.